going to start the recording now, and we'll get started here in just a minute.
Writing's not that easy.
Well, hello everybody. My name is Andrew Hughes. I am the president of Designing Digitally, and today we're actually going to be talking about something that I am very passionate about, and one of the reasons why Designing Digitally actually got started. First and foremost, I want to say thank you to everybody for joining us today. I see there are quite a few people that are jumping on right now. That's why we're starting a few minutes late. So thank you for bearing with us. I just want to say also thank you to everybody on the Designing Digitally team for helping us put this together. We have a research division, and that team actually is doing everything that we can to help clarify and define terminology and buzzwords within inside of the industry to really hone in on exactly what it is and how it works. So with that said, today we're going to be talking about defining game-based learning, and what I'm going to do here first is make this full screen for you guys, and we are going to go through some of the items that we have here. First things first, we are going to really talk about how we apply it to corporate training or government agent training. As far as who Designing Digitally is, we actually are a custom content development company in between Cincinnati and Dayton, Ohio. We are in-house. We're an award-winning company. We have 4 core competencies: e-learning, serious games, simulations, and mobile learning. And everything that we do falls within inside of that, whether it's a VR build, an augmented reality app, or a full-out serious game that's on a multi-platform device systems. So for all of you, I have a quick question. I'm going to start a poll. And how many of you are familiar with game-based learning? Not gamification, not serious games, but how many of you are actually familiar with game-based learning? So I'm going to go ahead and put that poll out right now. And if you guys can go ahead and select, we have some that say yes, very. Somewhat familiar with the basics, so it looks like we got a lot of familiar with the basics that are winning. And it looks like, ooh, they're still coming. We're at 16%, 18 not no, yes, 22 of you are very familiar, and about 6 of you are somewhat familiar and know the basics. So, or 59%, I'm sorry. With that, we're going to talk a little bit about what it actually is. So what is game-based learning? Well, here's what you should understand. Game-based learning is the actual concepts of you learning something while playing a particular game. So whether that's you learning how to ice skate while playing hockey, whether that's you learning how to throw a baseball while playing t-ball, it's the actual learning that is happening within inside of a game. It's the objective of the things that they need to learn to overcome the challenge that happens within inside of the game. So what is an actual game to us as people? Well, here's the thing that you should understand. It is a set of challenges. Those challenges are set in front of you in a particular order, and your objective in any game is to overcome and utilize the environment and the tools in which you are supplied to overcome the challenges that are that are in front of you. Whether that's Candy Crush or Call of Duty, they all have that same fundamental structure, which is a challenge, and you have to adapt and overcome. Now, the interesting part about game-based learning and games in general, compared to training everybody, is game-based learning is them pulling information and using it to adapt to their environment and to their scenario and situation. E-learning and training that we've been doing for hundreds of years now, and we haven't been doing e-learning that long, so nobody get all technical on me. We have had this push mentality rather than allowing them to pull this data. So we have said, and many of you, the second slide of all of your courses state the objectives of what they're going to learn, and then you push that information in front of them. That is a vastly different thing than what games do, what game-based learning actually is, and what serious games or even utilizing game mechanics and gamification actually does for people. So understand that game-based learning is you overcoming and learning and adapting within inside of the game and getting better at it, utilizing the tools, while serious games are the actual game that we want them to play with an underlining objective that may be aligned to business. And then we're going to be talking about gamification here in just a little bit. So the first thing I want to show is quite an interesting experience. This is what it's like if your whole life is a game. Of course you can't skip learning. Pick your profession, but remember, you pick your debt too, everybody. We're on level 5. So I think this is an interesting video, and the reason why is I get asked all the time, hey, what games lend themselves best to a learning experience, or What games could I use in the classroom, or what mechanics or what theme is best for this scenario or that scenario? One of the things I want to express is that video that you saw right there is actually one of about 4 different approaches to games, explaining how your life is a game, that I've actually been able to obtain and present in many of these presentations. And every single one of them has a different approach, a different way of looking at it, and a different way of showing mechanics and an understanding of our lives. So in my opinion, the one thing that I want to make very clear is there is no right answer to, oh, sales reps should have timers on everything. You should have wear an alert of Carmen Sandiego for compliance. That doesn't necessarily, there's no right or wrong answer. It's more about the actual people in the audience that's going to be taking it. The same thing we look at when it comes to the training, but now we're looking at, is this something that they are going to engage in? And I state that because there's a lot of people look at fun. Fun needs to be a metric, but we also need to look at actual return on engagement. How engaged were they with this actual experience? So what do games actually offer? Well, the biggest thing, like we were talking about, they present a problem, whether it's to shoot the enemy or to complete all the candy matches. They provide those challenges. And the one thing that I want to know that's very interesting, I want you to know that's very interesting about games compared to our traditional learning experiences that we have, our games get considerably harder as we go through the levels. That doesn't necessarily happen with inside of a learning experience. What ends up happening is we ensure that they get the answers right or wrong, but we haven't really looked at making the challenges harder and making them bigger obstacles to overcome. And so one of the things that you would want to look at when we're looking at this is how can you make each step harder and harder for the actual audience. So here's a question, got a poll question for all of you guys. Let me ask you this. If your existing training that you had to take, the last thing that you were trained on, whether that was in the classroom or online, would you enjoy the training more if it was a game, or especially for your job role, or do you feel it would not be? Again, I don't know the context. I don't know a theme. We're just looking at, what do you feel if it were that way, if it was something? There's going to be some people say absolutely not. There's some people that say yes, and that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And the reason why each person has a different approach, each person has different interests, and receive messages differently. So for this game-based learning experience, again, don't know what you were trained on, but we have right now about 86% of you saying yes and about 13% of you saying no. And again, that's a great observation, because what I do want to tell everybody is you don't have to gamify or utilize serious games for everything. I strongly do not suggest that at all, especially for if you want them to just remember it, or your lower levels of blooms, being able to do something like that quick and easy, it doesn't necessarily lend itself to game-based learning. So in my opinion, you can do that, but if you really want them to practice, let's say, a sales process or something of that nature, then by all means, a game can actually, a serious game could be something that we could utilize. So why do people actually enjoy games? Why do human beings enjoy doing games? Well, there's a whole bunch of different gambits to this, but there's a couple things that we know for a fact. Psychologically, they do increase happiness with the rewards mechanisms, because one of the things that we're in is we're in an age of instant gratification. So many people are used to instant feedback, instant rewards for things, and that's why, badging and leaderboards have just taken off over the last 3 to 5 years. It provides people a sense of accomplishment and achievement. It increases their ability to do something because they're actually learning inside of there. And it actually enhances their decision-making skills because they have the ability to think on the fly. But one of the things I think is very interesting about games and even serious games in the workplace, we have this connotation that they can't fail, and we don't want them to fail. But in video games, you fail all the time. The whole point is for you to die. That's the entire premise of many of these games, or for you to lose. And it's your job to figure out how to not make that happen. That doesn't necessarily the approach when we're doing traditional learning. And it's something that we may need to look at. And it gives the ability for them to make mistakes inside of here instead of making them in the workforce. So one of the greatest examples, I think, for game-based learning that I have ever seen in my lifetime, come on YouTube, there we go, is watching somebody play T-ball. So the first time that we ever played T-ball, and I'll kind of turn this down and mute this, the first time that we ever played T-ball, everyone, the first thing that we did is we attempted to hit the ball on the tee, and we smacked the tee just like this kid. And if you're new to this game, you may have just thrown the ball to them and missed the base and ran around like this. And what's happening is, over time, this young man learned how to hit the ball off the tee, learned where to run to, learned when to run, learned how to steal bases, and learned how to play this game and how to overcome the obstacles within inside of this game. And the more that he continued to practice and play this, the better he got at it. So we need to take that into consideration when we're doing these types of things, that game-based learning is them learning inside of the game and learning from and adapting to the obstacles that are in front of them. So I get this quite often from people, and the next one is gamification, game-based learning, okay? Here's the thing. I want to see if you guys think it is, and so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to start the poll now. Do you know the difference between gamification and game-based learning? And if you do, great. If you don't, that's fine too, because if you know anything about me, I will be explaining it. So we're almost 50-50 in the room. Let's see who's going to be the tiebreakers. It's going to be the people that, watch this, the people that have this open on a tab. Oh no, here comes your boss. I'm wondering how many people flinched and looked behind them. So right now, we're looking at 45% of you say yes, you know the difference between gamification and game-based learning, and 54% of you say no. So what I'm going to do is actually clarify that starting right now. So first, let's go into this. So gamification, and this is the long-winded version of that, but basically gamification is taking a mechanic or two and adding it to an activity that we already have to do anyways. So I'm going to give you guys a great example of this, okay? I had a neighbor. His name was Charles, and he had two kids, a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old. And the 5-year-old and the 7-year-old, every year I had this big maple tree in the front of my house, beautiful maple tree. It's a red maple, turns red, and then drops all of its leaves. And one time I went over there. This was when they were 5 and 7. I'm sorry, they're 9 and 11 now. So when they were 5 and 7, I went over there and said, "Hey, I'll pay you guys $5 each to rake up my leaves." And they said, "No, thanks." And so I went, "Okay, well, that's fine." So I thought about it, and I'm like, why is it that these kids don't want to rake the leaves for $5? So then I thought, you know what? My approach is an archaic approach to people that are wired differently. And I don't want to get into an argument about millennials or anything of that nature, but I do know for a fact that these individuals have been bombarded with feedback and technology and stimuli far beyond what we have ever had at the ages in which they had. So what I did is I decided to go to the Dollar Tree, not the Dollar General. That is false advertising. I went to the Dollar Tree and I bought a 99-cent whistle. I bought a 99-cent trophy. I bought a white poster board and a black marker. And I went back home. And so I spent $5. And so I went back home and I walked over to the 5 and 7-year-old and said, "Hey, I want to play a game with you guys. And I think we can play this every year, see if you guys are interested. What I'm going to do is I'm going to time you guys. And I got 2 barrels there. And we're going to record your time, and we're going to have you guys race against each other and see who can rake up and put all the leaves into the bins the fastest. Whoever wins gets this trophy, and we'll write your times up there, and every year we'll see if you're faster. I want to let you know, before this, they wouldn't do it. Every single year, if one leaf falls in my yard, these kids are knocking on my door asking when they're going to do the contest. So I tell you that because that is a great example of what gamification actually is. The objective is we still have to rake the leaves, and I still had to get the leaves raked. And I still wanted to figure out a way to motivate these individuals to do it and have them earn rewards for it. So what I ended up doing is taking mechanics, a timer, and providing a contest with a reward, and providing a challenge, and them competing against not just the brother and sister against each other, but against themselves over years. And then as they got older, we could see how well they did on their own leaderboard. And it's actually hanging in my garage, which is a really cool example that has happened one-on-one. And so that, my friends, is a great example of what gamification is. It's adding game mechanics to things that you do on an everyday basis. Now, the thing that I want to state about this is, and we're going to talk about it, these are just some of the aspects and examples of mechanics and things that you can use within inside of the actual gamification, or using gamification for learning or motivation or something of that nature. So, for all of you, I have another quick poll question. Let me ask you, do you feel, have any of you, worked with gamification, and do you feel it improves the training and the effectiveness of employees? So you can go ahead and give your honest answer. Again, they're anonymous answers. So if you feel that it doesn't, if you feel that it gives a dramatic impact, or you feel it does a little bit of help, feel free to just be honest and let us know. Again, these are anonymous votes, so no one will know if you're hating on gamification. And I'm okay with it too. Because again, it comes back to what I said, everybody. Utilizing, let's say, serious games or even gamification for every single meeting that you do may not be an effective approach. Using a mix of mediums and a mix of approaches to particular aspects of a curriculum is what really impacts what you're doing. So it looks like we got 30% feel that it does have a dramatic impact. 60 says it helps somewhat, and 10% doesn't think it has very much impact at all. So thank you guys for that feedback. It really helps kind of give us a clarification on how you feel. So let's talk a little bit about what is the difference, and let's compare game-based learning to gamification. And hats off to Brittany and Kylie for making these amazing graphics. From here, we've kind of broke this down in a little bit different way so that we can kind of talk about it from our end and not necessarily the way that every single other individual is Googling the difference between gamification and game-based learning. We wanted to make it look like, hey, this is the way that we see and how it can be utilized. So the first thing with gamification is, it is very compatible with e-learning and additional training. It is easy to implement, adding badging systems and scoreboards and timers without having to think of an entire game with a theme and a concept and particular levels. And it can be very inviting to use. There's quite a bit of a technology and tools, even like open badges from Mozilla, that's open source API, that can implement and distribute badges as needed. But the other side of it with game-based learning, you're really immersing the learner into, that scenario situation. You're providing the ability for them to be creative or fail, and it actually allows them to block out some of that distraction because it's providing a level of engagement and stimuli far beyond the click next to continue that we've been bombarded with, which our generations, and I'm the oldest generation to have video games as the primary form of entertainment. And I can tell you, I've been bombarded by traditional e-learning, and it's boring. And I can tell you, people that are older than I have told me that traditional e-learning is boring. And we now have what used to be 30,000 kids on Adderall and Ritalin in the schools in the early 70s, and we now have over 32 million people on Adderall and Ritalin. And the one thing that hasn't changed is the format in which we are teaching those same kids that are being bombarded by stimuli. So what are the things that actually works, and what do these things actually do? They make learning fun, and I know for many of us fun should be a metric, but at the same time fun is relative to the person, it's arbitrary, so it's got to be something that appeals to them. It builds engagement, and it also helps with retention because if they're more engaged, it's more inclined to be retained. If it's more retained, they're able to use that during their work environment, and which then improves business processes. So if you have knowledgeable and engaged employees, you have a better business every single time. So we talked about this a little bit. The two differences from training industry is gamification just uses those training elements, while game-based learning is a full, we're going to start with building a game and not even just, hey, we're going to slap some of these pieces together. And then we can talk in depth more about that later, but you know, one of the things that we find for game-based learning that we have the opportunity and the privilege to really work with is the ability to do serious games and train these individuals on all of these different types of approaches. We have done, I think, just this year alone, maybe 4 to 5 compliance training games, which has been what I think is fascinating, because in the past, you know, compliance training was really just looked at as, hey, we have to take it because we have to sign off on insurance policies. But now what we're finding is the $7.8 billion in compliance violations in the United States alone every single year that is paid out by companies because of compliance violations by their employees. Now, after having to shell out that money, they are now understanding that compliance training should not just be click it off and click next and take your test at the end. So we're seeing a lot of people looking to make serious gains out of their compliance training, even their policies, and we see things such as games for diversity, cognitive awareness, socializing in the workplace, team building, sales, customer service is a really big one we've seen a lot of work with, and everything across the board. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that we built the entire training curriculum to be a full-out game. What we do is we build learning ecosystems, and within inside of those learning ecosystems, we will use the games for post, follow-up content material, assessment material, performance experiences, performance assessment experiences, and then we look at building in a curriculum that allows for these to be integrated into an entire learning ecosystem. So you guys should be very aware of this, but we see a significant impact on retention and recall rates in our employees. And what I think is very interesting, and this is from training industry, they have these stats and information, but one of the things that I want to make very clear to you is if we saw a significant impact in retention, recall rates, and knowledge in the workplace, that should increase the ability of performance for the employees that are knowledgeable and are not able to access what they need to at a particular time. And what they've seen from this is they've seen post-testing of an increased retention rate by 300% by using game-based learning. Yes, it takes longer to build, but if you're going to have a 300% increase in post-testing retention from this stuff, then tell me why it isn't worth having it, taking it longer to build or costing more. It doesn't make any sense to me. So one of the things that we find, I just said, traditional e-learning is very effective for the lower level of Bloom's taxonomy. And the reason why is, believe it or not, looking at Training Magazine stats, 70% of online training currently is not completed by their full staff that's assigned to them. So what I think is very interesting is we are cranking out courses and telling them they must take them. They're taking what there's required, but over 70% of it is not fully completed. Also, believe it or not, 3 out of the $4 that we have been spending on those traditional, let's just get it out the door, is actually been found to be wasted because that information is not being retained, therefore you don't have a knowledgeable workforce. Therefore, without that knowledgeable workforce, they're wasting time and money by not knowing the appropriate channels, the processes, the tools, and the objectives that the business is actually trying to run. And ironically, that's exactly what training is about. It's about enhancing the internal or external parts of the business. That's what training is about, not we must know this, we must know that. Your job is to provide a knowledgeable workforce so that it improves business processes. That's the single most handed version of what training is supposed to be doing. Another thing we just talked about, it stimulates the crap out of the mind. I think I have explained this before, but you can find that there are many studies, and I'm about to show you one, where they have done many scientific studies on comparing people that have been playing avid gaming, video gaming, such as Call of Duty, for a particular time compared to people that have not. And we actually have that for you guys to kind of look at.
Has shown increases in cognitive function after playing video games. One study in particular had participants play Super Mario 64 for 30 minutes a day over 2 months. Afterwards, the brains of these participants saw an increase of gray matter in areas associated with memory, strategic planning, and fine motor skills of the hands compared to those who had not played. These are particularly encouraging results for mental disorders which cause these brain regions to shrink, using video games as a therapy. Surprisingly, action games can also increase attention to detail in individuals. Take a look at the following words on screen and yell out what color the word is as fast as you can. So, green, blue, orange. Okay, now try a bit faster without me. As we continue, it becomes more difficult because there is a conflict between the word itself and its color. Chances are, if you play more than 5 to 10 hours of action games a week, you're able to solve these problems much more quickly. This is because your brain is actually more efficient in the regions associated with attention. Of course, video games can also be incredibly educational, and while you may not be playing some of your favorite games for this purpose, there are certainly many games that are used as effective teaching tools for both young and old. They may even help kids who suffer from dyslexia read more effectively. In a small study, dyslexic children who played regular video games ended up reading faster and more accurately, once again relating to improved attention skills. Meanwhile, other studies have found improvements in eyesight. Not only can they see smaller details more clearly, like tiny writing, but they have an easier time differentiating levels of gray. Very practiced action gamers were 58% better at perceiving fine differences in contrast, which is important as this is one of the first things to diminish with age. Even in the elderly, improved memory and focus is seen. More importantly, specially designed brain-teasing video games have been shown to slow the aging process of the brain by up to 7 years. This is because they are cognitively complex and require mental energy. Since you're able to keep track of what's in front of your eyes, keep an eye on the blue circle here. Eventually, it will turn yellow like all the others. I will then point to a circle, and you tell me if it was originally blue. If you knew this ball wasn't blue, then you're a functioning human being. But let's make it harder. Staring at the middle of the screen can help to keep track of the blue circles. Was this circle originally blue? If you said no, you'd be right. One more time, but with 5 blue circles. Was this one originally blue? Yep, it was. It turns out the average person can track about 3 to 4 objects, while practiced action gamers can track around 6 to 7. Finally, as technology continues to transform medicine, surgeries are being completed with the insertion of cameras and remote-controlled tools, and these surgeries have very clear parallels to video games with a screen and a controlling device. Not surprisingly, young doctors with previous exposure to video games show fewer errors and faster completion than those without.
So I think this is very fascinating. What you see is from the stimuli and from the interactions, these individuals' brains have become more sensitive to movement, color, and the ability to produce or regulate information faster due to the high movement of those action games. So one of the other things that we see with game-based learning and utilizing serious games to do so is we've actually seen a lot of motivation from these, because if people enjoy what they're doing, they're more motivated to do so. One of the stats that we found is 75% of corporate learners said that they're more productive with their learning in their learning environment if they actually were able to play games or had them as games. So another thing that we find is it has been considerably increasing social interaction. It is actually one of the things that we find from the research that we've done, that we actually have a quote from a customer that it's easier to interact with others and establish dialogue, overcome cultural, social, and generational barriers when they're actually playing games together. It's a lot of the reason why we play icebreaker games when we first come into a group session. It's why we play, orientation games to get to know the team or get to know the organization. They find that they're able to retain that information. And another one that I thought was quite interesting is there's also the ability for serious games to help with the self-esteem, with solving approaches in a different way rather than a particular obvious way of doing it. But I also think that it is able to give you some detailed, personalized feedback, which we love. One of the things that I think is interesting is we live in that age of instant gratification, and so I want you guys to think about this for a second. How many of you text someone and you get frustrated with them when they don't text you back? And for all of you that are thinking to yourself, nah, that's not me, you're wrong, you know it is. And the reason why is you live in the age of instant gratification. You're used to getting feedback on everything. Notifications from your email, invites from things, notifications from your social media systems, notifications from your bank accounts. We're used to instant feedback at all times. Most of it is personalized for us, but a lot of it is automated. And so we now live in a world where they are expecting that feedback, we are expecting that feedback, and everyone else is expecting that type of feedback. And what does give that feedback is serious games and games in general, because they're built with feedback mechanisms as you continue to progress through an experience. It also gives them the ability to practice in a fun way. And one that I can actually show here real quick is, and for all of you that would be interested in this, our company actually has a learning assessment game that is a cybersecurity learning assessment game that actually only takes 5 minutes. It's a micro-learning game that you can deploy across all of your LMSs. And what it does is it, after everyone takes it, provides us exactly what training your company or your employees need and how at risk your team is regarding cybersecurity risks and threats. And the reason why I state this is because this is a way that you can do an assessment game to find out exactly where you sit. And then what we're doing is we're utilizing XAPI to provide that data, and then we provide that data back to you so that you know exactly what your next training plan should be for cybersecurity awareness. And the reason why is that type of learning experience is something that may be something that would be very dry in different aspects. You're basically interacting with your communication portals, and your job is to get the right decisions made and to ensure that you don't end up in a situation that you don't like or are violating any type of cybersecurity risks for the company. Because you guys should probably know that over 80% of all cybersecurity breaches happen from an internal employee being phished or being duped in some way of giving data and information that gives them access to it. So for all of you, it's internal. You're training or your organization, you're in the training department, your responsibility is to ensure you have a knowledgeable workforce. That cybersecurity game is going to be able to give us an understanding of what they're knowledgeable about, and then from there we can look at actually training them on the additional material. So it's a way that you can use a serious game to assess them too. So again, what we did with that learning experience that you just saw, it turned it actually into a challenge. I don't want to give all the goods away, but you're put into a particular challenge, and then you have to overcome those challenges. And in the way, you're going to have a lot of different both positive and negative scenarios, which are all randomized, and you have mechanics that have been built in for games that allow it to be fun and allow it to be something that is of interest and allows it to get harder and harder as you continue through that actual 5-minute experience. So another thing is game-based learning doesn't necessarily have to be something that's exactly what reality is. If you're doing exactly what reality is without any type of fantasy or over-exaggeration or the ability to fail, then you're basically making a simulation. So I just want to show you this one real quick. This is actually a development that we did for Checkers and Rallies, and what it is it's a assessment game. And what this is the serious game is your ability first to learn about the different sandwiches, but once you get to that point, what happens is you're first given the simulation piece where they walk you through what you're supposed to be doing. And then you get to what's called the Big Buford Challenge. And what you may see down here in the screen is a timer and hamburgers and a meter. What's happening is this is the patience meter for your customer. This is how long it's taking you to make this particular burger, and this is how many opportunities you have to get those burgers correct. And what happens is you're running the assembly line, and you're able to do each and every step of building each one of the burgers for Checkers and Rallies. And the reason why we actually built this as a assessment game is that we wanted to first walk you through the simulation piece where we step-by-step train you how to make each one of the burgers, but then actually have you experience that in a pressure-like situation. And it's all randomized, so every time you play this, you get a different menu order and a different process steps that you have to do in those orders. So it makes it really cool to be able to have something like that that's not over the top, but allows for them to train their employees without spending a bunch of money on the actual preparation of those ingredients. Because for what we were told from our customers, our fast food customers, they average about $3,000 to $3,500 in expended waste, which is food that they assemble during the training that they're not allowed to basically utilize, and so they have to toss it. And so this is eliminating that cost for them by allowing them to learn how to do it on their iPads and learning how to do it while there, and then actually getting hands-on practice by shadowing people afterwards. So some of the things that I want to talk about in regards to challenges, we see quite a few different challenges when it comes to game-based learning. One of the first ones that I want to talk about is theme. A lot of times people come to me and say, we want to build a Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego type of experience, and I say, why? And they start to explain it, and I say, there's probably better mechanics or a better theme that would work better for that. But just remember, theme is just a lure. Theme is just what gets them to sit down and start playing. It has to be good game mechanics, and it has to be fun throughout. If you could take anything away from this, it has to be fun and engaging throughout so that they enjoy to play it. They're not going to just play it once and be done with it, and we can't consider that a success. That's not how it works in the video game realm. It shouldn't work in the training realm that way either. So what are some of those items to consider? First off, make sure you're developing relevant content in context with that content. So a great example is if, let's say, you have an audience of females that are 40 and above, Call of Duty is not their primary video game interest. So make sure that you're actually developing something that they're interested in. Another thing is balancing enjoyment and instruction. One of the things that I don't like to see is when we are provided presentation information and then you give them a game or a mini game or make a mini game out of your knowledge check that has nothing to do with the actual context of the information that you are providing. So make sure that you don't go with, oh, we're going to put our information in, and then they get to play a mini game for reward, and then we get to put our information in. That doesn't do anything for you. That's not actual game-based learning. All you're doing is trying to reward them with doing something that isn't revolving around your business, and that's not the type of rewards that we want to give them. Just like you don't give the dog a treat before they go to the bathroom. You give it to them possibly after they come back in because they did go to the bathroom. So it's the same type of thing. You want to make sure that you're rewarding them and providing them feedback and rewards based on what the challenges that they're overcoming. And then make sure that you don't provide too many competitive or mechanics. You know, one of the things I see quite often is people want to build all these mechanics and make it as complex as possible, or integrate with some API system that is built into their existing systems, and you have to work with IT to do just that. And what I mean by that is, let's say they have some software that they use in the workplace that's proprietary. They might want to tap in to utilize that material for the game. But my question is, for longevity, is that needed, or can we build that game and those processes and those ways of doing it without using live data, so that if something does change or it does, you guys decide to go in a different direction, we at least have the processes and understanding around some type of game mechanic and not necessarily just integrated with some system for the fun of it. So here's the next question that I have for you guys today. Let's see who's paying attention. The next question, does your company offer game-based training in any department? So we got 1 vote, 6 votes a no, 9, 10. Yeah, yes, some of our training, yay, has some game-based approaches, 4 of you. There we go. So we got 0 for all, or yes to all. 33% of you are saying yes to some of it, and 66% of you are saying none. Are there any other voters? I can't do auction, but if I had that auction vote, I would, or the auction sound effects. I can't sound like an auctioneer, but if I could, I would, to see if we could get somebody else to pay attention. Hey, for all of you guys that are on Facebook with another tab, come over here and vote real quick, and then we'll move over. Oh, look, it worked! Ah, here everybody goes! They're like, oh crap, he knows we're on Facebook. Okay, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, WhatsApp. There, we're getting a few more. All right, everybody. So let's talk a little bit about some of the great examples of actual learning within inside of a game. There are many different examples, but one of the first that I really want to talk about is The Walking Dead. I find The Walking Dead to be an excellent game for engagement and for actual learning, and here's why. This game is not something that was, in essence, a game that took a lot of it's not an action game, so it didn't take a lot of movement and controls. It was more of a multi-choice game. So what ends up happening is the decisions, and you can see this right here, the decisions you make, this character will remember those decisions for later on. So what ends up happening is you see the outcome of a decision later, much later. It is not what we've done in the day-to-day training side, where if they answer the question wrong, go back and do it again. And in games nowadays, we are no longer doing the, oh, you got it wrong, you died of dysentery. It isn't an instant gratification feedback on the decision that you made. It's the feedback that you made a decision. Does everybody understand that? It's not instant gratification to the point where you see the outcome of the decision made. It's the confirmation of a decision is being made. So there's a much bigger difference when it comes to me talking about feedback mechanisms and instant gratification. So looking at the decisions, they're always remembered by characters, and depending on how you treat them, the outcomes of how they treat you, actually, you start to see that. And what I love about this is the story throughout. You have to make major decisions. Like I have to give I have 4 candy bars. I have 8 people in the hostel. I have to figure out who I'm going to feed and who I'm going to let starve and die. And those major decisions, I get to then see that play out. And it's not, oh, they died, see you. It's, you know, an episode later where they finally starved to death. And we're seeing the outcome of that later on. So you really have to take into consideration that when they make a major decision, if it can be delayed to see how that changed or did something later on, that's the best way to look at it, because it's as close to life as possible. And that's how life usually works, unless we walk out in front of a road and get hit by a car. Then it's an instant reaction. But a lot of times the decisions that we make today affect tomorrow, or affect a year or 10 years from now. So when you're actually looking to implement this, what is the first couple things that you should be looking at? The first thing that I always tell people is look at your goals. Your learning goals should be based around your business goals. And then from there, you can look at mechanics and look at creating a game design around those goals that you want them to do. Whether that's that you want them to learn how to cross-sell your products and services better, whether that's you want them to become more cognitive aware or understand culture bias, whatever that is, from there you take that as the core understanding and you build things around that. The next thing I tell people, don't spend hours upon hours looking at a gaming engine. I mean, Unity is one of our go-tos. It's a great video game engine to develop out both 2D and 3D video games, but it's very complex to get into. It's not Storyline, it's not Captivate, it's not Raptivity, Lectora, iSpring, and sorry to anybody else that I left out, Domino. It's not those easy product tools. It's a video game engine. So understand you will have to know Java, JavaScript, C#, things like that to really dive into it. One of the things you need to understand is you need to have an interesting story and character personalities throughout that people can connect with. One of the reasons why The Walking Dead was so good is you are the African-American male that was going to jail, that the car wrecked because of the zombie outbreak, and you find this young girl named Clementine. Well, you make major decisions to protect or let Clementine go on her own throughout the entire game. And it sets that character personality of how you're actually going to interact with those. The next thing is create a prototype, present that to your audience. Even if it's hideous looking, it's not about how pretty it is at the beginning. It's about how it actually functions. A lot of times if you look at like our internal alpha builds of a game, and especially if it's a 3D game, a lot of times it is gray 3D models where we haven't even done lighting, texturing, or any of that to where we can get it functional. Once we get it functional and people like how it's functioning, and our audience likes what we're doing, then we'll make it absolutely gorgeous. So the next time that they actually see it in the beta, they're like, wow. And so make it functional, and then you can make it beautiful. So a couple other things for our game-based learning solutions. I'll show you guys a great example of this. This is for the Equipment Leasing and Finance Association, and it's called a Be the Boss, and it's a really, really cool experience. And let me pop this up real quick for you guys, and we'll come back to that. For ELFA, we had the opportunity to work with the Equipment Lease Financing Association, and I'm going to be honest with you, they were amazing. Alex and the team gave us the ability to really be creative and work with them. And your objective is to basically run your own finance and leasing agency. And so the major decisions that you make on how to actually provide these services in each and every department impact your ability to be compliant, your ability to actually complete this. And this actual game-based learning experience is used for some of their certification. So what I think is quite interesting is we can put you in the scenarios that you may see and the association has seen, but at the same time we have things randomized, we have a dynamic, and your job really is to be able to understand how to strategically run a finance agency. And for us, this was an excellent and a fun project to do with them. And one of the things that we had is one of the companies that, once this was launched for ELFA, purchased over 100 licenses alone on the first day of release. And for the investment that they made with designing digitally, they got their return on investment for that investment within first 2 months of launch. For us, we do nothing but clap our hands for ELFA, and we hope that that continues to be an excellent excellent case study for them years going by. But I also know the way that designing digitally works is we will want to come back to ELFA and say what's working, what's not, and let's look at it from an analytical standpoint and see what people are really need remedial training on. And I'm sure that that's coming very soon if one of our learning solution specialists here hasn't already bugged Alex and her team. So in regards to the next steps for us, one of the things that I would like to do is look at doing a few things for everybody that was on this webinar for us today. A couple things that you should be aware of is you should receive an email from our innovation team. In that innovation email, you will have a survey to our Serious Games. It's about 3 to 5 questions. If you complete that, we will send you a free game-based learning white paper. And then from there, inside of that email, you'll also have the ability to schedule a meeting with one of our learning solution specialists. And the reason why is you might have some questions, you may want to see some approaches, or you guys may be looking to do some implementation. And if so, we do have the ability to work with you guys to really develop out any of these game-based learning experiences with you alongside. No matter how big or small your organization is, we're certainly here to help. And I just want to say to all of you, if you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter. I am Andy Hughes on Twitter. Somebody took Andrew Hughes. And if you want to email any of us, you can email info@designingdigitally.com, and we'll be able to provide you with additional information that should, in essence, be able to provide you guys with any follow-up or case studies or ROI data that you guys may need. Now, before we go, though, I do have one last question for all of you. I want to see if we can potentially rate this actual webinar. So I want to know if you guys did feel that you gained some knowledge from this. And if you could, feel free to pop this into the presentation and just be honest. I don't know how much I told you guys, but we are expanding, so I've been working 12 to 16-hour days for 22 days straight. So hopefully I had enough energy for you guys to make this something that you guys would be interested in. And at the same time, for all of you that aren't aware, Designing Digitally does have quite a few resources that you guys can use on our website. So if you actually go to designingdigitally.com, you will see a resources area where we have case studies, infographics, white papers. You can even join our digest, which is just additional research from the research team that isn't out for public yet. Our company newsletter, which we blog 3 to 4 times a week. Industry definitions, you can see some explainer videos in our 360 tour of our office. So for all of you, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to have the opportunity to help define and clarify this material for you. And until we meet again, I just want to say stay creative. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.